Well, welcome to our series of webinars. Today's webinar is Children's Expression of the Rebirthing Process in Experiential Play Therapy. As we get started, I do need to make a disclaimer. First of all, I would consider this workshop to be an advanced level of training in experiential play therapy. If you're a person watching our webinars for the first time, there will be a lot of concepts presented today that may make you have to look at the world a little differently and how we relate to children. So I think it's important, though, that we see how children tell you about the birthing process that they wanted to have and didn't. One of the concepts that I believe is that all children know what good nurturing is, and when they don't get it, it causes some anger and also some fear. So when children use the experiential play therapy concept, they use regression to go back to earlier stages of their development, especially stages where they were traumatized and could not experience the normal soothing in their development. And so that leaves that area of development as a kind of a gnawing experience in their life. The sensations of that experience keep welling up inside of them, sometimes at a conscious level and at other times an unconscious level. But it is there, and it is constantly influencing the life of the child throughout their life. So I wanted to make that clear. The second and most important thing is this therapy is in no way associated with the holding attachment therapy associated with Evergreen, Colorado. That case led to the death of Candace Newmaker in April of 2000. And if you've taken a course in ethics, in counseling and psychotherapy, the case came up, and a number of laws and rules and ethics have been formulated from that experience. So when I use the term rebirthing, most people will think about the case in Evergreen, Colorado, and I want you to know that our term rebirthing has nothing to do with the concepts related to that case. But if you're a child therapist, and most therapists, you've heard of the case. In experiential play therapy, our model, the child is the director of the play therapy, and it allows the child to create play expressions from their implicit memories early in their lives, especially around their birthing process that may be remembered as an early trauma within the child. Let me give you some concepts about experiential play therapy so that you can see that it's not a controlling, dominating style of therapy. First of all, infants experience their world as sensations. And harsh and threatening sensations create fear. Some of the other fears are depression, anxiety, and things of that nature. So we look at fear-based, anxiety-based, depression-based reactions in children. We look at that sensitive and soothing sensations creates a responsiveness to relationships. And this is a relationship-oriented model of play therapy. So we try and minimize the power that is expressed in the play. Matter of fact, we try and give as much power to the child in the play therapy. Now, we do have our limits, and that is that we don't want the child to be hurt in any way, and that nobody personally is violated in any way in the play, okay? And that the child feels safe and secure in this process. So, going back to infants, since infants remember everything through sensations, I say that children and elephants never forget that those subtle sensations go into your neurological system and become part of you. And if they're negative neurological sensations, then it causes a reaction in one direction. If they're positive, soothing, nurturing sensations, they create development of your brain in a different direction. So it's very important what a child gets in the early years of development. Now, our premise today is that it is as important in the womb and in the birthing process as any other time in their development. Now, what we believe is through implicit memory, children can remember everything. That it's mainly at a somatic level, and is usually, of course, in birthing and what we're talking about today in the womb, it is pre-verbal or non-verbal experiences. So it is pure sensation. We also believe that children have an innate capacity to move towards health. So we don't have to push a child, so to speak, or direct them or to do any behaviors to get them to do birthing process. If that is an issue within the child, that they will move towards that incomplete or gnawing sensation and try and resolve it. And what we have to do as experiential play therapists is to help focus the child and hear the meaning of their play that is taking us to a symbolic, metaphorical reframing of their birth or womb process. So the child will heal themselves. They will move towards healing in the context of an I and thou relationship. So given the relationship with the therapist and knowing that they are free to express themselves in whatever way necessary to alleviate pain, suffering, noxious stimulation, or whatever they're trying to resolve, the relationship protects them and holds them together. Okay. So as play therapists, we have to examine the issue of power in the play therapy. We need to allow the child to know that they are in charge of their process and that our responsibility, and in experiential play therapy, play is the intervention. Playing with a child and playing their themes and their symbolism and knowing their process and validating it allows them to move forward in their confronting the sensations, the issues, the content, the memories. So we believe that the child will move it directly in that fashion. Let me say that when a child is in a crib and they're needing something, they feel a sensation. And when they feel that sensation, they give out a cry. And then that cry is saying, I need something, please give it to me. And then we, as the caregivers, move in, check out what that may be, and provide it for the infant. Now that happens hundreds of times in a day for the caregiver to take care of the child. Now, what says to the child is a relationship takes care of me. And so we recreate a relationship to take care of the child that will allow them to express those things that they need that they didn't get. For example, our view is that most inappropriate behavior by a child is to tell you that they're not getting what they need in the relationships that care for them. And so what we have to do is help people adjust those relationships so that they start giving to the child what they need. Now, experiential play therapy is what we call second order change, meaning that we look at what motivates a child, what the child is trying to say to us, what is the meaning of their inappropriate behavior. And we look at that, and then we try and assess that, and then meet that need that the child is trying to tell us. So most children's inappropriate behavior is really a cry, like the infant crying for their need, only it's a little different need, and they want somebody to respond to them, usually in a more social, intimate, caring, soothing manner. In experiential play therapy, we do a process called an honoring process. And you'll see that this is all done in the context of a relationship that allows the child to hopefully get what they haven't been getting. For example, we accept the child any way she presents herself. So if a child comes in and let's say is grumpy and saying that they don't like the toys and they don't want to be there, we're going to honor that and reflect it to her and let her know we heard that response. Okay? Had a boy come in one time, he looked at the toys and he said, "You got the dumbest, ugliest toys I've ever seen anywhere." Now, I change that to a context of a relationship, and I say back to him, sometimes when you look at the world, you don't see the world you'd like to see. I don't get into confronting the child or changing their perceptions. One of the views in experiential play therapy, if a child draws a black line across a piece of paper and says it's red, it is red. In other words, from the phenomenological view of the child, they're telling you this is how I see the world. And we do not try and change them. What we do is hear the need behind that, which is to be accepted. So we accept their black line as red as part of accepting them. Now, people who don't think quite this way and they focus on first order change, which is behavior, they would question the perceptions of the child, and we don't. What we want is more perceptions from the child so that we can interact with them to allow them the freedom to change. We respect the child in any way he wants to be. So we don't try and say, you play with these toys, or we want you to do this, or do this way, or, okay, why don't you draw me a picture right now? We don't do that. The child is free to, in our model, to lay down on the floor and go to sleep if they want it. And we would honor that process. When it is honored, they don't go to sleep. So there's a paradox there in a way. We need to be present with the child in any way she presents herself or he presents himself. And so if they want to go over and just wipe the top of the sand for 15 minutes, then we stay with them in that process. Another thing that we need to do is understand what the child is giving us in their message. Be it loneliness or fear of rejection or unsure of themselves or whatever it might be. We let them be that way. Now, what we have to do after that is give meaning to that experience and help them understand that we know what they're feeling and what they're experiencing through that behavior. We also want to validate whatever the child gives us. And that was another example of the black line being red. After these have been met, the child will test us to see if we're for real and that we're going to stay that way and not change to a more command-demand, control and dominating paradigm. We do not do that. The only time that we come into an issue with the child is if they have a limit that they're testing that may endanger them or the therapist or threaten their security, then we will set a limit to protect them. So once they learn that, then they know that we're really playing for them. So what we want to do is provide safety and security throughout the process. So what I say is that experiential play therapy enters the child's world at a level that I don't believe any other form of play therapy goes to that depth with the child. And because of that, then we see experiences and play and meanings in children that I don't believe other models of play therapy deal with. So I want to make one concluding statement. In no way would our philosophy do what was done to Candace Newmaker or any other child controlled or restrained in the attachment model. So I want to make that really clear, because when you hear rebirthing and then you tell somebody, well, I heard a workshop on rebirthing from Colorado, they're going to go immediately to that thought. And I know because in trainings I've done around the country, people will immediately raise their hand and say, are you that group from Evergreen, Colorado? And I am not. Okay. However, in my training and being so involved with children, I've always wondered if there should be a therapy based on the birthing process in children. In other words, how is one birthed? How do they create that theme? How do they tell us the underlying issues in that theme? And what are the subtleties that are influencing this person's functioning throughout their childhood? And so we can look now at what the child is going to tell us about their development. So we're going to focus on trauma in the womb and trauma in the birthing process. Now, more normalized births have influence on the person, but they don't disrupt their development, their functioning, their relationships to the degree that traumatic birth and traumatic womb experiences do. Now, I want you to know that biological parents will be slow to consider these concepts as the therapist brings information to the parents about the child's need for birthing that only the people that were there in the birthing process would know, and then all of a sudden the therapist saying, I noticed that something happened to him during the birthing process, and the parents will kind of wide-eyed and look at you. And now, one of the things to start with is in our intakes, that is one of the things that we ask and check out extensively. What was the birthing process like? How did the pregnancy go? Were there any complications? And you will be surprised how many parents tell you that everything went well, and that the child in their play will tell you that it was a crisis for them. In other words, mothers will say, well, they gave me this to, stop the delivery for a while until certain things happened. And then they gave birth. But what they don't know is during that 6 hours of waiting in there, ready to be born, it became a crisis to the child. And so that will show up in their play. We'll give you examples so that you have that. Many times when we have parents and we tell them, I have a feeling that this happened in the birthing process. And some parents will go, whoa, how'd you ever find that out? They can't believe that their child, maybe 6, 7 years old, is telling us about their birthing process and what struggles they had with it when the parents thought it went just fine. And I'll say to you that most OB-GYNs aren't considering the emotional world of the child in the birthing process. And yet, the child will remember every nuance of that experience and how it affected them if it was disruptive. Okay? I'm not saying that there isn't normal childbirth, but that the disruptiveness influences the child. Now, you may say, as you watch this, this guy's thinking stuff that no one else would even think, or I'm opening awarenesses for you. But I want you to know that if you were to watch the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? And if you haven't watched it, I suggest that you watch it, because one of the premises of that movie is you can't see what you don't believe is there. And I probably deal with a birthing issue in a child every 2 weeks. Some child is in that process of telling me about the struggles of their birth. And I will give those examples. I'm just building up so that we're aware. Another concept, and I use it, it's from Albert Einstein. He says, it's the theory that determines what one will observe. And once you make the shift in the experiential play therapy model, you will see children telling you all kinds of things that people don't hear. That children are just constantly giving you information about their lives and how they're functioning in it and what's going right and what's going wrong and what they need. And you see people, and I hear the child saying it, the world goes right on. Doesn't respond to the child. So in experiential play, when we start responding to those messages from children, they just gravitate to the therapy and to the therapist. Our belief is that children communicate extremely profound experiences of their lives through metaphorical expressions that incorporate toys, play process that indicates symbolic depth, and representational play of situations in their lives constantly. So let's look at some concepts that relate with experiential play therapy that allow children to move towards birthing experience. First of all, children will only do this birthing experience when they have absolute trust in the therapist. And so when you know a child is moving towards birthing experience, you know they trust you completely. They could not get there without that trust. Another thing is that experiential play therapy is an internal process rather than an external tracking of the child's behavior. So what we do is we enter that child's experience and tell them that we understand it. Now, we don't say to them, I know that I'll give you an example that happened 2 weeks ago. Table like this, and the little boy crawls up on this table and he's rolling around on the table, and then he goes to the edge of the table and it looks like he's just going to plummet down the side. So I say to him, wait a moment, And I went over and I put two beanbag chairs and a huge pillow and everything and laid it there. And as soon as he saw that, he just plummeted straight onto him. What that experience was, and he climbed up on the table and did it about 4 times, was his traumatic birth. That he was just flung out of the womb, you might say. Now, he was anxious to get out of the womb because his mother was a drug addict, and that it was painful for him to exist in the womb with drugs coming in. I'll talk a little more about that in a moment, okay? Okay, the birthing trauma is remembered by the child in their somatic expressions during their play therapy. One of the concepts that we have about trauma, I'm getting a little ahead, but all trauma, if you're 7 years old and you have a trauma, and your birthing was a trauma, you were born to a drug mother, let's say, while you'll deal with the trauma of 7 years old, but what will happen is all trauma takes you back to original trauma. And so what you're going to see as the child deals with the 7-year-old trauma event is you're going to see regression, and the child's going to go back and go to the birthing process. Now, they've got to work on the 7-year-old trauma, but it tells you where they're going. And they will go back to the original trauma, because the themes of the original trauma are influencing and affecting the resolution of the current trauma. See, everybody thinks, and pediatricians will say, child's not going to remember anything. I hear that statement. I'm surprised that in today's world, we still have people saying things like that the child won't remember it. Children remember every part of their sensory and somatic experiences. The issue is that it's non-language, and so they can't speak to it through language. However, they re-experience those sensations over and over and over again. Okay? See, people think if you don't experience it cognitively and can talk about it, you don't remember it. And that's not true. Those sensations are emerging all the time in a child's life. We can just look at any time a child reacts to a situation and they react out of proportion to the event, then we know that some part of something in their history is telling us that it's getting triggered and it's causing sensations that are going to lead to aggression, fear, anxiety, depression, some reaction that builds up inside of them. Okay. So trauma does not speak language, so it has to speak something, and for us it speaks experiential somatic experience and events. The reactions to trauma are elicited by unconscious experiences or sensations. So the child isn't even aware that this event is taking over their experience. But what occurs is that the sensations tell them that they're in a threatening situation, that they have something to fear, that they could be, and then we go to DSM-4, which says a trauma is any event that you believe you could have died or been seriously injured. Well, right then, the child immediately goes to memories of those violations in the past and feels like one is coming. So they're going to then start reacting as if that experience is reoccurring. I have a saying that when trauma is activated and a child enters a trauma sequence, which is trauma play, then is now. They will give you the same experiences now that they went through at that time. Give you an example. Just this week. A little boy, and we're in the war of good and evil between dinosaurs. And he is taking the evil side, and I'm taking the good side. And the evil is outdoing the good. Okay, so what he does is he sprays me, and he says the spray freezes you, and you can't move. Well, what I know when he says that is that in the trauma event for him, he froze and couldn't move. And so he's telling me that through his metaphor in the play. Now, at that same exact time, I know that that experience is going through his body. This is a 5-year-old boy, just turned 5, and it's going through his body. Now, how do I know that? Well, his arms start shaking. His speech regresses. He starts stuttering. He has a hard time. His body is like moving around like he's going to fall over. He loses his coordination. He loses his train of thought. He starts asking me, like, why is that there? What happened over here? In other words, he's trying to account for everything in the situation because he couldn't account for it before. You see? So that's where the then is now. That little boy, in playing the dinosaur war with me, is back in the real war, metaphorically, of somebody abusing him. Okay? So he's telling me his experience. Now, I have to respond and validate that with him so that he knows I hear him. Now, my dinosaurs freeze. I go, I can't move. Oh, this is very frightening. This is really scary. I don't know what's going to happen next. And I can't do anything about it. And then he knows that I understood that in the event that he's referring to, I understand that he couldn't do anything about it, that he was stuck. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things I did with my dinosaurs. They were stuck, and that's how they were frozen. Okay, so children have to regress and go back in their development to the trauma event. So anytime you're having a child that's going to do rebirthing, they've got to go back, and you'll see regression in their body. Matter of fact, you'll see infants, if the trauma were in infancy, you'll see them roll around on the floor. Most of the play that we're going to talk about in this section, womb and rebirthing, all occurs on the floor of most playrooms. Okay, the kid on the table, and he had to go to the floor, though, do you see, to get there. But most of it's on the floor. The floor is primitive development. The ceiling and higher to the ceiling represents adults. So you see kids who take a gun and they'll play like infantile and then shoot the gun at the ceiling. And it tells you that that's their view of aggressive adults coming into the crib and not taking care of them, but them fearing the presence of that person. Trauma is an experience, usually a continuous re-experience of the components of that trauma and fear. And so the child is reliving the original trauma event over and over and over. What we want to do is change the perspective of that event. What we want to do is allow the child, in the memory of an event that they had absolutely no power, to help them play so they get the power they need to conquer that event. But we can't tell them, you got to be stronger and then this will go away. No, what we do is play with them and let them play being stronger and stronger and stronger as they conquer the event. Okay. All traumas take the child back to the original trauma, which I've already said, and we're going to talk about traumas that go back to very early development. Okay, so later traumas, which I've already said, stir up old traumas. Okay, trauma play and experiential play therapy is generally described as, and when a child goes into trauma sequence, it's usually very pressured play, it has high intensity, it is very deliberate in focus, it's very intentional. The child will tell you, hold your sword this way. I mean, they know exactly how they want you to be sometimes. It's usually aggressive. The content tends to be violent. There can be flat affect or exaggerated affect. There's usually dissociative process when you re-enter the trauma experience. And there's a theme of a need for protection or a need to escape. And those will tell you that you're in the trauma sequence. Okay. Now, during the rebirthing process, what the child's trying to do is reframe their birth. So a lot of times what children are going to do is they're going to go into the birthing process, and the first time or times through it, they're going to tell you what it was like originally, like the boy falling off the table. He's telling us how jerky and uncared for he was. Now, when he plays the birth later on, which I'm going to describe to you, you'll see a different form, because now he can create the birth that he wanted, the way he wanted it and wished it were. So we'll go to that in a little bit. Okay. Another thing is that trauma has to be historical in order to be resolved. So, for example, we can't resolve the one of our birthing, but the child that has a trauma at, let's say, age 7, and if that is still going on, then we can't go back and resolve the birthing trauma. So they want to get this one resolved. And then, for example, if a child's in an abusive situation, not until the perpetrator or abuser is out of the picture can the child then start working on this issue that allows them to go back to this issue. Okay. Now, I want to make it clear that if a child's birth and everything was fine, and then let's say, we'll just hypothetically, mom marries a guy and then he's abusive. Okay, then he has to work on this abuse, do you see, and the trauma, but he can't do anything until the perpetrator's gone. Now that child may not need to go back to birthing, okay, because he was fine, his development went along and was normal until the 7-year-old trauma came into the home. You see, so not every child goes back to rebirthing. Okay. I also said that implicit memories just keep flowing back into awareness and sensations. Now, at sensations, not that most people would even know. One of the examples I use is, and we're going to talk about some siblings here, step-sibling, but to show you how sensitive it is that this comes, and most kids can't even conceptualize it. But a mother had a 13-year-old adopted daughter, and it was a hot day in June, and the temperature was 102. And they're out, and her daughter turns to her mom and says, you know, this was the same temperature the day that the police came and took me away from my parents. And so this mother was real sharp. So she got on the internet, found the town, found the temperature that day because she knew the date. And sure enough, it was 102. Now, most people would feel the temperature of 102 and get irritable and angry and some other reaction. But this girl was now in a safe home and knew that her adopted mother was taking good care of her and everything. And so it took her back to the violating time in her family the day that it ended for her. That didn't mean she didn't have a lot of adjustment to get to where she was at that moment, but it tells you how subtly those memories come in. Now, another thing would be a possibility of a seasonal reaction or an anniversary reaction. But those are how subtly they come. Okay. Usually the feeling is accompanied by unidentifiable fear, threat, something of that nature. One of the concepts that we believe is that therapy must heal the brain that was traumatized. Thus, the regressive behaviors take us back to that brain functioning. This is really important because you'll have a child who's like 6 years old, but they're going back in regression and they're trying to solve a trauma back earlier. And then they try and do something which you know that, let's say, every 6-year-old should be able to do. And they start doing it and they can't get it done. And it looks like the child has a disability or something. Well, they do in a way, because they're trying to solve it in the developmental stage that it occurred with their developmental capacity at that point. Do you see? So they're not 6 years old. They're 18 months, let's say, and they can't pour the water into the dish right, or bang things or spill things. And the one I always see is children who are going back and they want to make a sand castle to smash the house that they lived in when they were back in the regress stage. So what do? They fill the mold with dry sand, turn it over and lift it up, and it's just a pile of sand. And you'll see them go like that because that was the style at that stage in development. Okay? So you'll see what seems like inappropriate ways of handling events by children who are older than that. Okay, so we must see regression in order to see rebirthing play. Okay, so play therapy, in order to change, requires numerous repetitions of trauma expressions to dissipate the impact of the trauma. Now, other people in the field may disagree with that statement, but what we believe is that the child confronts the trauma, confronts the trauma, confronts the trauma, confronts the trauma. Now, some people in the field say, no, you can't let a child play trauma over and over again or it owns them, especially if it has aggression. And what our view is that no, if you see any change over session to session, then the child is moving their trauma. Okay. It's not, we don't view it as rehearsal, we view it as externalizing the internal pain. Okay, Peter Levine says a statement, and I think it's very important, and that is, trauma is stored in the nervous system, not in the trauma event. And so we have to look at the child and their functioning and see how they function in relation to that event, not focus on the event. So we want to help the child move those sensations and change them in relation to their memory. Okay, trauma is a right brain experience and is stored basically in the right brain. So we must access the right brain, and play therapy is a right brain experience when using experiential play therapy. Okay, therapy proceeds from a lower right brain to a higher right brain, and experiential play therapy follows that model of a bottom-up model of healing. Trauma play usually is playing out a theme of death in play therapy, because the child perceived that at the moment of the trauma, they could have died. And you'll see in a number of these replaying the rebirthing that there was a theme of fear of death for the child. So the child will metaphorically play a death is occurring or threatening or going to, is an impending experience. The unresolved near-death experience is never forgotten by the unconscious until the experience of that threat is disempowered or annihilated by the child. And then they can own their empowerment back again. So as part of the play, the child will become more and more and more empowered. The problem being is that they become more empowered aggressively in the earlier stages until they can integrate the empowerment and use it in a positive sense. One of the things I always say is if you want a child to move from A to B, what they usually do is move from A to C and overdo it, and then integrate it in, and it becomes part of them. So you're going to see a period a lot of times of overaggression by a number of children trying to find their dignity and their security. So when a child plays death, death equals trauma, okay, unless the child is grieving the death or loss of a loved one, then we're going directly. But when a child plays the theme of death and there has not been a death, then they're telling you about trauma. Okay, I want to show you now on the charts the placement of when children play rebirthing. So I'm going to go to the chart now and show you where rebirthing usually occurs. Okay, on the flow chart, which represents the flow of play therapy in the experiential model, what a child has to do is right in here, they've got to play what we call the drama of the trauma. In other words, at this point, all I can tell you is what it was like from their perspective. And so they metaphorically play the trauma that was done to them, usually with the experiential play therapist being in their position of being the victim, and then they metaphorically are the perpetrator to tell what happened. So you do the oohs and ahs, and in the developmental stage they tell you it's happened, and that's how we tell the child, we're with you. We're experiencing the sensations that you experienced at the time. So we want to feed it back as sensations. You know, it's better like to say, instead of saying you hit me, I can feel the sting. It really hurts. My arm aches. And you want to give the internal pain that was experienced metaphorically from what they did. They're not going to do the same event. They're just going to let you know what it was like. Now, if they start hitting you a little too hard, you can come out of the play and say, now nobody gets hurt in the play. I want to take care of each other, and then go back into the play. One of the best things for a child, let's say you're sword fighting and the child's trying to take that sword and hit you in the face. One of the things that will help with that, where they get to express the sensation, is to say, let's do it in slow motion. And then you do the slow motion, and then they come up and hit you with the sword across your face, and you spin around, and then you can say, it really stings, you see, and then they got their message across and you received it and gave it back to them. Okay. Now, you got to remember, some kids will then say, okay, we're ready for fast motion, and then you got to be ready for that too. Okay, the child's going to kind of struggle here for a while, and then right in here they're going to start moving, and this is the area at which they will tend to do the rebirthing. Okay, it can be anywhere from along here, but it's usually right in this area right here. In other words, they have enough power to reframe their life. Now, this chart shows you the flow. Many of my trainees and students call it the roller coaster model of play therapy. But I'm going to show you this model, which shows you the regression. The A, B, and C are the same here, only child's coming along and they have birth. They come along. Now, we're talking rebirthing, so we're going to go back into this area. And I notice you can see the chart takes you back before birth, because children will take you back. If you're going to play birthing, you got to go back to before you were born. So they're going to take us back earlier than that. Okay, so here's the A, B, and C. Now, I'm sorry about that, but trust is established here. Okay, and trust is established here. Now, every child, let's say their trauma, like I gave you an example, is at 7. Let's say it's 4, okay? So the trauma is at 4, and the chronological age of the child is 7. That 7-year-old knows exactly where they need to go. But they've got to play this drama of the trauma, so they're going to play the drama of the trauma right here. They're going to tell you what happened to them. And after they get that conveyed to you, they're going to now start resolving the current trauma. So we're going to start resolving the 4-year-old trauma. Now, when you have a traumatized child, you have 2 actual children in there. You have the 7-year-old coming in, and when they get into this play, they immediately go back to being 4. Now, what we found was that when the child got a grip on the 4-year-old trauma, and they felt so safe in the therapy and with the therapist, that they would just turn around and head on back. What that tells us is, as we learned, is that the early years of the child that we thought were sense of well-being was established did not occur. And we find this in a lot of cases, like adoptive cases, foreign adoption, coming from Native American reservations, where we have no information on their background. Now, what the child's going to do is go back here and regress and take us all the way back to their birthing process right here. Okay. So now what they're going to do is play being in the womb. That's the first phase. So I'm going to talk about being in the womb experiences and how children present those. Okay? Okay, before we get into the child actually playing those events, let me tell you the toys that I have found to be very beneficial in children as props or dynamics of their rebirthing play. So, like I said, most rebirthing is done on the floor. Okay, one of the things that you should have is baby bottles. Because when the child comes into the playroom and sucks on a baby bottle for a few minutes and then goes into their play, we know that that play is in the first year of life, most likely. Okay. Now, if you accept the play at that level, it gives them permission to go to an earlier stage. So a lot of times children will check you out and say, are you going to accept my immature infant play? And if you do, then I can go to an earlier stage in development. Another item is pacifiers. And we keep 2 or 3 baby bottles and 2 or 3 pacifiers in our playroom at all times. Now, every time a pacifier bottle is used, we take it, sanitize it and everything, and bring it back in the playroom. So we have probably 6 bottles ready to be used, and pacifiers. Okay, blankets. Children like to roll up in blankets, curl up in blankets. Matter of fact, the table that looks like this, that's in our playroom, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll lay a big blanket over it. And then I was trained as a Gestalt therapist many years ago, and so we put our big Gestalt pillow under the table, and the child can then lay on that big thick pillow, and then the blanket covers, and they are encapsulated in their womb. And I've had many children do that. Okay. We have those tent tubes, and they're very important. You know, those round tubes that, you know, you can open them up and kids can crawl through them. Very important in children that get stuck in the birth canal. And they use those tubes just like what originally happened. I mean, when you go into a parent and you say, well, he was playing a rebirthing experience and played it this way, and the parents will just like, you know, how did he know that? I mean, that was accurate to what really happened too. I've never had a child come in, play a birthing experience, okay, and then go to the parent. Now, how you deliver this to the parent is crucial also, because if the parents are not psychologically minded parents and sensitive and attuned to their child's needs and issues, you go in and say this stuff to them. So you have to kind of groom the parent to be aware of metaphor and understanding their child's expressions. And when you do that, you go in and you say, well, he played being stuck in the birth canal, and looks like he was stuck there for quite a long time. And the parent will just look at you and go, yeah, it was 4.5 hours. But they're surprised that I know it and that their child expressed it. But boy, that gets them in tune with their responsibility in working with the therapy also. Another item that's real valuable is what we call the egg chair. And the egg chair can be purchased from IKEA. And it is shaped like an egg with a covering going over it. And it spins around in a circle. And children will get into that chair and have it be the womb. And I've even had children like put a teddy bear in there and then have the teddy bear represent their negative birth or the positive birth from that chair. I found that a wading pool is a good tool. Now, you just need one that's about yay round. I went and bought one that was even bigger than that. And I let children put water in it with the condition either I can go outside in the summertime, but if they need it. Now, children will do all the same play without water. The reason I put water in it once in a while is I have parentified children, and I put water like in the pool, and one little girl, she's like 5.5 going on 6, parentified, takes care of all her younger siblings. My mom was at the bar meeting guys and bringing them home. And matter of fact, just to give you an example, she came into play and she said, I want to put the dishes in the water and add soap and wash them. And she spent her entire session washing my play dishes and drying them and then putting them back on the shelf, and that was their session. She's ready to go. Now that's the parentified behavior. I want to get her to be a child. Well, when she got into that pool, and we had to put like 4 inches of water in there, and first thing that she wanted to do is dump all the plates, cups in there and play with them. And you could just see this 18, 20-month-old child playing in water. And that's exactly what we wanted, is that she could now have her 18 to 20-month-old developmental experiences back again. And she played and everything. Now, the first thing that she did before she got to the dishes was say, give me a baby bottle. I gave her a baby bottle. She laid right down into the water and took the baby bottle, put it to her mouth, and just laid there. Now, I know that she's going back totally to the womb, okay? But this is where we are in her stage of therapy, which happened just 4 days ago. Okay, but she got to be the child, and that's what I'm trying to create in her, is that she won't lose her childhood. Because a parentified child who loses their childhood, when they become an adult and have their own children, they can't parent them because they're burned out on parenting and angry that their child would get a childhood and they didn't have one. So it creates a cycle. Sandbox or a sand container of some kind is very important. A hula hoop, or case I'm going to explain to you, a basketball hoop. And boy, he shoots baskets and baskets and baskets, shooting that ball through. And this last session, he's a little boy that went off the end of the table. When he saw that wading pool, just shifted him. So we'll tell you about that. Beach ball. We have some beach balls where you can see inside the beach ball. In other words, they're clear sections. Because it was really interesting, because the little boy, after he did the table thing, he picked up the beach ball and he's holding it and he said, I want to get inside there. And as soon as he said that, I knew that he needed a womb. So I said to him, I have a ring that you can get inside of. And boy, he just lit up. I went and got the wading pool and just set it down. No water in it or anything. However, it's on a hardwood floor where this agency is. And so I moved it over to a rug, and then I put a blanket underneath that so that it was a little softer. You might want to get some foam that you can put under, because the child is going to roll around in there like an infant. A box is a womb. At an agency that I was doing therapy, and they got new file cabinets, and so they had one of these big boxes from a file cabinet, and I asked them if I could have it, and they said sure. Now the first thing you have to do is get all the staples out of it so there's nothing that can scratch the child, and then use that, and children will climb in it. Why do you think children like boxes so much and like to get in them? Because they are a metaphor for a womb, and allows them to have the experience they didn't have, let's say. Now, even children who had a good experience in the womb might want to go back there and just relax. It depends. Now, I'm going to tell you the difference in this girl. Okay. Large pillows or beanbag chairs, because you can see where this little boy had to fall onto those items to represent his coming out of the womb. Water containers, and you need the big tall ones, because what children are going to do is go down and play under the water, and that their play will occur under the water, and all the items they use will be down under the water. Well, you know then, or you look for, and you'll see it, the theme of rebirthing or being in the womb and getting ready. So they'll tell you the womb experience. I'm going to give you an example of that. Okay, darkening the playroom. If you have a playroom that has no windows and turn the lights off, and the child takes a flashlight, and usually they will have control of the playroom with the flashlight, saying that they have control in the womb. Okay. A side light, never be totally in the dark with a child. So have some kind of night light that at least gives you shadows, so you know that some kid isn't coming over and taking, let's say, a sword and whacks you in the dark. Okay, so we don't want that to happen to you. Also, dolls that can be dunked in water and drenched and everything, because the child's going to take dolls and put them down into the water and play some experiences. So, okay. Again, when you go in and talk to parents about the play that they did with any of these items, it is difficult for the parents to believe that the metaphor really is their birth. Now, once they get it, boom, you got a supporter of your therapy, and we'll get a lot of referrals, because people see how much children change after rebirthing play. It's like a renewal kind of experience for the child. Okay, let's give you some in the womb experiences. Babies that are in the womb of drug mothers, they all play the same similar theme. And the theme that they express is a jarring, banging, jolting, jerking, slamming, pounding experience. So you'll see them bang things, crash things, jerk their bodies, flinch, things like that while they're playing, being in the womb. A lot of times the item that they use to represent themselves may not always be a baby doll. Matter of fact, a lot of times it's a frog or a fish or a seahorse, but it's some form of primitive life that lives in the water. Okay. Did a supervision of a play therapy session, and the therapist had been seeing this boy for a while, and he comes in and she says, I can't make any sense of this play. And the little boy takes out like 8 fish, their little and he lays them around in a circle on the floor of the playroom. And she doesn't know what it means. It looks like 8 fish in a circle. So I stopped the tape and I said, do you know anything about his birthing process? And she says, well, not a whole lot. And I said, well, I think what he's going to do is he's getting ready to play being in the womb. And something happened in the womb to him. Now what he did is he moved the fish out, and then he took 2 cars and put them in the center, which would represent him and the trauma, and started smashing them together. So I knew then that he had a difficult time in the womb. Okay. And I explained to her. And then I showed how all of the play that he did from that point forward explained his struggles in the womb. The person that I was supervising was saying, I would never have seen that. And most of the people that I take through this training and go through don't have no awareness that a child would be in the womb and telling you those experiences until they see it, and then you see the process. A therapist in one of my groups joined for a year, and she came in and she says, I got to show you these pictures that a boy drew. And the first picture is just paint slapped onto the paper and everywhere. But in the middle of it looks like a sunny side up egg. And then she shows the next picture, and it's flow through a tube. And she said, I think this is his original birth, and this is the birth he wanted and everything. And I asked her, I said, had you not been here, would you have figured that out? She said, I would never have made any sense of these 2 drawings. But she said, now that I knew that you taught us these, that I could see that he did it through artwork. Now, children can do it through any medium. It's just that that's what that child chose. Okay. One adoptive parent, when she saw a sonogram of the child that she adopted, she got to see it, and the mother was a drug mother. And one of the things that was in the sonogram, and I've had other people share this kind of thing, but the little boy was in the womb in the fetal position, had his hands down, and was squeezing the umbilical cord so that no more drugs could come in and hurt him. And every time they checked him, that's what he was doing. Well, the mother was a drug addict. She was taking her drugs. She didn't care about that baby, and the baby was trying to survive. So babies do feel pain when their mothers take drugs. I told you about a large box being a womb. I had 3 girls, and their mother was a prostitute. And mother drank, drugs, sex, all kinds of things. These girls would have to leave the apartment that they lived in when a man came by, and then mother would pull the shade down, and then these girls had to walk the streets. Now, this little girl was 6, and her 2 sisters were 8, and they would walk the street at night and then wait for the shade to go up, and that was their signal they could come back in the house. And how they got caught was they were out 11 o'clock at night on winter night walking along, and the police car pulled over and picked them up, and then they were brought into the social service network. But this little girl took the file cabinet box that I was telling you about earlier, and she said, "Can I get in that?" And I said, "Sure." So she climbed in, and she laid down in there, and you could look down in the box, and she was in a prenatal fetal position. And she says, "Go around and bang the box." So I took the foam sword and just walked around the thing and banged the box and shook the box and everything like that. And that's what she was telling me, is that's what it was like to be in the womb with her mother taking drugs. Now later on, she asked, and she wanted to do a rebirthing. What she said is, "Will you rock the box?" And so what I did is just kind of rocked it slowly and moved it around. And at this time she had a blanket in it, and was laying on the blanket and a pillow inside, and it was real soothing, and rocked her. And then she said, "Okay, I want to come out." And I said, "Okay." And so I just checked with her what I was going to do, and she said, "Yeah." So I just kind of rocked the box slowly over until I gently laid it down on the floor, and then she rolled out of it. And that was the birth that she wanted, without all the pain of the drugs. Now, children usually play the trauma experience first, and then the wanted or reframed experience afterwards. Now, not always, but that's the most common way that you see it. Some children will just go straight to the birthing that they wanted and not have to play the trauma birth. But if they play the trauma birth, they're usually going to play the reframed birth. Let me give you an example. A person comes in for supervision, and she's a therapeutic foster home social worker. And she said, "I got this play from this child, and I wanted you to look at it and then tell me what you see. And then we have the records, and I can tell you if you're right." And I said, "Okay." So, little boy, he's like 5 years old, maybe 6. And the first thing he does is he picks up the baby bottle and is about 2 feet from her and puts it in his mouth and starts rolling around on the floor. And so I said, "Well, he's really regressing. Now, you're not sure if it's going to be in the womb or not yet, because he's going back. But anyway, then after he rolls around, he comes over to her, and there's a sandbox there. And what he does is he takes and opens the baby bottle, okay, and it's an empty baby bottle, okay, and he takes and he puts a little baby figure in it, puts the lid on it, sucks on it for a while, then he takes it and rattles it and bangs it on the edge of the sandbox, and so I said to her, "Whoa, there's that baby had to deal with drugs in the womb." Remember that jarring, hitting, smashing, okay. Then he takes it off and he fills the bottle with sand, puts the lid on it, goes back and bangs it and hits it, smashes it. Then he takes the lid off and he pours half the sand out. And so he's in there, And then he takes another baby and puts it into the bottle, adds more sand, so there's these two figures encaked in the sand, bangs it, hits it, shakes it, and everything. And then he goes over to the sandbox and he opens up the lid and he pours it until the first figure, which was a little girl, falls on the sand, and then he pulls the bottle up and and at that point he stops breathing and he's just frozen. And you can watch him, and then all of a sudden he just sits there motionlessly, and then he takes the lid off and pours the sand until the boy figure lands in the sand. And then he goes, and he hasn't been breathing all this time he was sitting there. Then he takes the baby bottle, puts the lid back on it, puts it up, starts sucking on it. He crawls over to her lap, and she picks him up, and she's holding him and rocking him and smiling at him as he's sucking on the baby bottle. She said, "What do you think of all that?" And I said, "Well, we know that mother's a drug addict and took drugs during the pregnancy. Obviously, he must be a twin there, and that there was a delay or something between the birth of the first twin and his birth. And so he almost thought he was going to die before he was born." She said, "Wow, well, let me tell you the story in the records, okay?" She said, "Mom was a prostitute, and because of her sexual history and her occupation and the drugs and everything, the doctor said for her that she should not get pregnant, and if she got pregnant, that she would never carry a baby to term, and so she would never have any children." And so what, my saying is, how do you tell a prostitute what their sexual drug behavior should be? Mom didn't pay any attention to that, and so she gets pregnant. And she's a drug user and everything, and in the last half of the pregnancy, the doctors tell her that if she basically moves, the babies will die, and that she could die. And so she's bedridden for 4.5 months. Now, she can't get her drugs anymore, okay? So she's withdrawing on drugs. What do you think's happening in the womb? These two twins are withdrawing from drugs also, so they're going through drug withdrawal. This is always interesting. The mother said, when it came time to deliver, she said, "I want a natural childbirth." So she's gone from a drug addict to wanting a natural childbirth. So the day comes when the babies are going to be delivered, and so the first baby's born. It's a girl. And as this little girl comes out of the mother dies. And as this little girl comes out, well, they're in a birthing room in this hospital, and mother dies. So they've got to do something right away. So somebody's taking care of the little girl. They've got to put mom on a gurney, get her running as fast as they can go, get to an elevator, go up, run into an operating room, and then just rip her open and bring this little boy out. He is totally blue. He hasn't had a breath in all that time. And do you notice that when he poured the first baby out, he quit breathing, which is exactly. Remember I say, when you go into a trauma sequence, then is now. And when he poured the baby out, he started to breathe again. Well, that's exactly what happened in the hospital. Now, notice that the hospital situation is, I'm giving you content. I'm giving you in a context. Do you see that what he did is he did it all through sensations. That's the point that is very important. And that all of his play matched with what the records had said. All children never forget. Let me give you another one, let me give you one for a short one. The girl with the 102 temperature, her mother was in the process of adopting a set of twins that had been violently abused by a drug mother. And this little boy, I'm doing his sister's therapy and his therapy. And his sister's moving along in the therapy a little faster than he is. He was so anxious and would do so many compulsive behaviors. But he's playing in the water, and he's got two boats, and he's got them full of water, so they're down on the bottom of the container. And what he's doing is he's taking the boats and banging them along the side of the container, and banging them. Now, I knew that he was born to a drug mother, but the way he was banging the boats and everything, I knew that it was he in the womb and his sister in the same womb, and that the drugs are coming in and banging. As he's doing this, he says to me, "Can I go get Melissa and show her what's going on?" And so I said, "Well, yeah, if you want to." And he was so excited about it. So he goes out and gets his sister, who's waiting for her therapy, and comes in, and then he shows her these boats banging. Now, I sat there and I said, here's a child playing out implicit memory or unconscious memory and playing the metaphor and sending it to his sister. Would she pick up the implicit unconscious information he was sending her? And she goes, "Well, what do you want? It's just a bunch of boats under the water." And he was so defeated. He wanted her to appreciate that. It was so important to him. So anyway, he ended his therapy, and then his sister came in. So I left the water there, figuring if she needed to complete something related to that, it would be there. But she came in. Now, she's ahead of him in the therapy. See, he's still coming up to being in the womb and struggling with that aspect of his life. His sister was ahead of him. She immediately went over and got two dolls, two baby dolls, went over, brought them over, and held them and fed those babies with the bottle and made sure they were all right. In other words, what he was doing is telling her, "Do you remember when we were in the womb and the drugs were coming in?" And she'd worked past that, and then it raised her anxieties. And she said, "Oh, no, I can't go there. I can't go near that again. I'm past that." And runs in, gets the two babies, gets baby balls, and starts nurturing because she has already worked through that issue, and she didn't want to go there at all. And so but it was amazing that the child was giving an unconscious message to his sister who was in the same event, but she didn't want to receive it because she had moved past that event. But I always thought, gee, they were both 5 years old, and he was sending that message to her. Okay, let me give you an example of domestic violence and situation. A person brings a tape in to me and says, "Can you make sense out of this?" Now, after they're supervised in this model, people make sense of it, but usually the first time I have to help them with it. Yeah. This little boy comes in, and he goes to the sand, and he digs a hole in the sand, and he takes a little baby figure, puts it in the hole, and covers it over the sand. Then he asks the therapist, "Can I fill the sandbox with water?" And she says, "Okay." So he takes the sandbox and pours water, keeps pouring it till it's kind of slushy on the top of the sand with the water. Then he takes and he lays a female figure here and a male figure here. And then he takes the figures and pounds both of them on the sand. Okay. And then he takes them and lays the female figure right on top of where the baby is born, and then takes the male figure and slams and hits the female figure. Then he takes the female figure and slams it into the side of the sandbox. And then she said, "What did that mean?" Well, I said, what he's telling you is that he experienced the domestic violence from being in the womb. And what he did is he dug the hole in the sand and put himself, and that was his womb. But it was dry sand, and so it didn't give him the sense of the liquid, okay? So he had to pour water all through the sand to make it wet like the womb. Then what he did is laid the mother on top, and representing him being inside of his mother, and then the male figure beating the mother, which he could feel. So he could feel all that domestic violence while it was in it. And then took the mother and slammed her against the side of the sandbox, which I said, mother's been thrown against the wall, and he can feel the jarring experience of being thrown against the wall inside of his mother. And she goes, "Wow, okay." So she goes to a staffing the next week. And in that staffing, there's the GAL, the caseworker supervisor, the grandmother who takes care of the child now, okay, and this therapist. And she says, "Well, I want to tell you, I went to a supervision and telling you about his play." And so she describes the play and everything, and then gives the analysis that I gave. And immediately the grandmother just burst into tears. And when she could speak, she said, "That's true. His mother was thrown against the wall a number of times by the batterer." But she said, "The reason I'm crying, because I already knew that, but I'm crying because I never thought he would remember that he wouldn't have any idea that he went through that event." And no, remember, children and elephants never forget. And so those are some womb experiences. Okay, before we go into examples of birthing play, why don't we take our break for 15 minutes, and then we will come back and we'll go through a number of examples of birthing play, and then show videotape of a child actually playing a birthing experience. So we'll start up again in about 15 minutes.